Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Stout. I'm Professor in Botany in Trinity College Dublin, and I'm lead PI on the INCASE project. You're all very welcome this morning to our workshop today. Thank you very much for joining us. The INCASE project is an EPA-funded research project. We're testing natural capital accounting approach at catchment scale in Ireland for the first time. We started the project in 2019 and we're halfway through what is a 4-year project. So welcome to the session this morning. We have a fantastic program ahead. Here's the agenda for the first of the 2 hours. We've got some great speakers. Each speaker will keep their contribution short, and we will run some polls throughout the session this morning to keep everyone engaged and so that you can input into the session. And also then we have a Q&A session at the end of the series of first talks. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please jot them down. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom and pop the questions in there, and we'll have a Q&A session, as I say, at the end of this series of talks. We will have a very short break, a 5-minute leg stretch, time to get a cup of tea or coffee at 5 to 11, and then we'll come back at 11 o'clock and we'll have the INCASE specific part of the programme. So the point of today, the aims of today are to show you where and how natural capital accounting approaches are being used and applied across the world. And we want to also share some of our findings from the INCASE project so far. As I say, we're halfway through, and so it's great to be able to share some of our findings so far with you. And also the third aim is really to stimulate further collaboration and research beyond the INCASE project. So the first thing we want to do is to ask you a question. I'm just checking how many participants we have in here. People are still arriving, but we'd like to ask you a question. We want to know something about our audience today. So the first question is, not that one. The first question is, which sector best describes your work? So which sector are you joining us from this morning? We'll give you a few seconds to answer that question. So I can't actually see the responses there. All are the responses coming in to the poll there? Yeah,
we're getting a bit of a horse race going between the different sectors.
Excellent.
So I'll move on to the next one.
Great, thanks very much, everyone. So our second poll is to ask you why you're here today. So what's your primary reason for being here today? Is it understanding more about natural capital approaches, more about the progress for INCASE, more about how you might be able to apply natural capital approaches to your own work, all of the above, or something else? So please do share your thoughts this morning. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. That's great. It's good to know who's in the room this morning. So I'm going to move on to our first speaker. And our first speaker, we're very honoured that our first speaker is Professor Gretchen Daly from Stanford University. Gretchen is the founder and faculty director of the Natural Capital Project. She's also the Bing Professor of Environmental Science and director of the Centre for Conservation Biology at Stanford. And she's on the board of the Stockholm Resilience Centre. And she really is one of the world's inspirations in terms of the natural capital approach. And she's going to give us some of her reflections on the natural capital approach in this short video that she recorded for us yesterday, because it's the middle of the night in California.
Hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity and invitation to meet with you on this really important occasion. My name is Gretchen Daly. I have roots in Ireland. I'm based now in California at Stanford University, and I work internationally with the Natural Capital Project, a partnership working all across the world to help advance the types of approaches that you're pioneering in Ireland, approaches to integrate in an ever more meaningful way the values of nature, human connections to and dependence and impacts on nature in all of our decision making, in planning, policy, finance, and day-to-day practice. And what I'd like to do is maybe just share 3 brief reflections as you all get started. So the first is that, as I know you're convinced, now is the moment. It's actually, on the one hand, a really hard moment to be living with the losses and pain of the pandemic, with the kind of unbelievable awakening that we're all experiencing in how connected we are, in how rapidly climate change is unfolding, and just looking around here and remembering only a few months ago the flames and smoke that enveloped much of California, and knowing that that's just one of many extreme events playing out all over the world today. So the time really is now, and the awakening we are experiencing in some ways is a tremendous blessing, and something where we don't want to lose the moment and the opportunity to drive change as hasn't been possible before. And so with the Dasgupta Review, with many country leaders coming forth and many development agency leaders also coming forth, calling for building back better, investing in nature, securing humanity and the planet, and doing so in an ever more just and equitable way, we are in a very heartening as well as challenging moment. And so my second reflection is really on where we are in the arc worldwide in advancing these approaches. 10 years ago, what we're talking about right now was really just a dream. It's amazing to see how rapidly the science, kind of the technology, and especially, most especially, the partnerships have evolved and deepened to enable this approach worldwide to account for values of nature in a very meaningful and impactful way. So we see demonstrations in which now millions of people are participating in countries all across the world that involve investments in nature and regenerating nature, regenerating climate security, regenerating the flow of benefits and livelihoods that depend on them in all kinds of places, in seascapes, landscapes, across vast open places, and in the heart of the world's mega cities. So it's inspiring to see that, and basically all countries are now using the tools that are freely available and accessible through the Natural Capital Project, the INVEST software for helping to relate where and how much we should invest to achieve the kinds of security that we're all hoping for. So the Natural Capital Platform is now used in all countries and was co-created with people in communities, in central banks, in other parts of government, in businesses and big corporations all over the world. And what we see now in my third reflection is just that a lot of the inspiration and leadership is coming from small countries, whether it's Ireland, Costa Rica, Vietnam, South Africa. There are a lot of places that are contributing some of the most inspiring examples of how we can make all of this real. And I'm very admiring and heartened by your effort, and wish you all the best in bringing together the trust, the innovation, and the real world practicality into this effort. And I look forward to, I hope, meeting you in person before too long. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gretchen. And it's great to hear from Gretchen, because she really started the whole Natural Capital Ireland journey for us by giving a lecture back in 2013. So it's really interesting to hear her reflections and hear about the work they've been pioneering over the last 10 years. And as she says, now is the time. So that's great. Thanks very much for that, Gretchen. Our next speaker is Professor Cathy Willis, and Cathy is Professor of Biodiversity at Oxford University and a member of the UK Government's Natural Capital Committee, and she's going to tell us about their experiences in the UK. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here, and Cathy, if you'd like to share your screen.
Right, let me see. Can you see my screen now?
Can see your screen, yeah. So if you just put it into presentation.
Brilliant. Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Cathy, we can see your notes in the full screen presentation. Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Cathy Willis. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jane. I just wanted to, Jane asked me if I'd talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the UK. The UK set up a Natural Capital Committee that was established in 2012, following on from a white paper that was published on the natural choice, and the government recognising that they needed to start to think about nature and the societal benefits that nature was providing throughout the UK and across the world. So the Natural Capital Committee was composed of 6 to 8 academics. We had a varying number over those years, and it was chaired by Sir Dieter Helm. But on that committee, we had economists and biologists like myself, and also policymakers. And then the secretariat of this was based in DEFRA. So the Natural Capital Committee actually came to the end of its term in December. So I'll just give you a very brief overview of the approaches that we took within the UK over this interval, this 8-year interval. So one of the things we worked very hard with the government to do was to produce a report, which is the 25-year environment plan, about how we can actually conserve and enhance those aspects of nature that are important for societal benefit. So the overarching government aim, the UK government aim, is to leave the environment in a better state than present. And that by doing this, by enhancing and conserving the nature and those natural capital assets, this will in itself benefit society through clean air, clean and plentiful water, thriving biodiversity, reduced harm from environmental hazards, including, of course, climate change, but also flooding, and then enhancing recreation, beauty, heritage, etc. There's also a policy in here, or a policy direction, that the aim is to use public money, taxable income, to pay for the maintenance and enhancements of these public goods, to replace the cap payment, which farmers are paid for producing food, for them to actually, in a sense, become custodians of the environment for its natural capital potential. All of this is now going through Parliament and will come through in the Environment Act, which will hopefully be ratified later on this year. But of course, the other work that we needed to do, and we did over this period, was to say which parts of nature are the most important to measure and conserve. Where are the really big data gaps in the UK which will stop us from being able to really identify these important patches of land or these important natural capital assets? And how do we urgently fill these data gaps? And so our focus really was broadly around these 3 topics. And very quickly, I'm just going to go through these. So the first thing we did was to develop a conceptual framework to demonstrate which parts of nature are the most important. Because of course, the minute you start to try and measure nature, it's such a broad topic that you can go from the tiniest insect right the way through to huge peatlands. Therefore, we split it up into the natural capital assets that provide key ecosystem services or flows that have a direct public good or a benefit. Now, as a biologist, as a mapper, a modeler, of course, our tendency is always to go this way. First of all, you map this, then you map that, and then you work out the public good. But actually, this is, I think, where many of us get, myself included, bogged down very quickly, because actually the list of public goods we're looking for from nature it's quite a restricted list. It is thriving wildlife, but it is good physical and mental well-being from being able to exercise outside. It's clean air, it's clean water, and therefore it's looking at what ecosystem services underpin this, and therefore what natural capital assets and where do we need them. So how does this work in practice? I'm going to give you one case study just to give an example. So this is the Evenlow catchment in Oxford. Now the Evenlow catchment, which is just north of here, is really important for two aspects. One, for biodiversity, but the second one is the trees and the landscape in that catchment stop flooding in Oxford. And we have a real problem with downstream flooding in the city of Oxford. So what natural capital assets do we need to measure to work out what we need to conserve and enhance where? Well, one of the things absolutely need is land cover maps, and this is publicly available land cover, but also detailed soil, angle of slope, topography, because using this data on the assets, you combine it with a hydrological model, and your output is it shows you in the Evenlow catchment which areas effectively are behaving like bare soil, and which areas, these ones in blue, that land cover on that particular aspect of the landscape is really important for reducing flood risk down in Oxford. So therefore you get a very exact example of mapping and modelling to determine where you need to be paying your farmers to maintain that landscape or enhance it to stop flooding. But I just want to show you one other example in here on the Evenlow catchment, because the problem that often happens is people equate biodiversity with natural capital. And biodiversity in itself, absolutely, we should be conserving and enhancing it. But if you look at where the protected areas and the important areas of biodiversity are in the Evenlow catchment, and you compare them to the parts of nature that are important for water flow regulation, the two do not overlap very much. Therefore, you need to think of each of these societal benefits as a different aspect. And this is something we talked about time and again within the Natural Capital Committee to get this point across, that it's not just saying we're map biodiverse habitats, then we're fine, because they're two very, very different functions and ecosystems at work here. So where are the greatest data gaps? One of the things we did was a huge piece of work to look at what are the data sets we have in the UK to map and model natural capital. I'm just going to give you this one slide here because I think this to me absolutely shows the issues. And I hope Ireland's different, but in the UK we've got very, very patchy data sets. So if you look at the soils, we're okay, we've got a good temporal resolution, but let's look at our hedgerow data. Hedgerows, incredibly important for carbon sequestration and connectivity and thriving wildlife. The most recent full survey of hedgerow data in the UK was in 2007. Think how much has probably changed in that time. Therefore, and every single data set we looked at, you see this really patchy set of data that doesn't overlap in time or space, which makes any modelling or understanding of changes in natural capital very, very difficult. So if the aim is to improve our natural capital in the next 25 years, then actually our main proposal at the end of our 8-year term was that the UK needs to develop a clear natural capital baseline for the UK. And we proposed that the UK holds a natural or an environmental or natural capital census once every 5 years, using the same models and data sets, but actually having the spatial coverage so that we can measure trends over time. And a pilot study on this is now starting by being led by Natural England this year. So I hope, sorry, whistle-stop tour there, just to give you a bit of flavour of the sorts of questions and problems and issues that we've been working with in the UK and where we've got to at the end of that term. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I wish we had time to hear more. It's really interesting to see where you are in the UK, having started sort of 10 years ahead of us. And it's really nice to see that catchment example and that you have similar challenges to us with regards to data and that issue of trade-offs between benefits. So thank you very much, Kathy. And we'll move on to our next presentation. So our next presentation is from Carl Obst. And Carl is the lead author and editor of the System for Environmental Economic Accounting, or SEEA. Carl is at the Institute for Development of Economic Accounting in the IDA group in Melbourne in Australia. So I will just try and bring up his presentation now.
That's terrible.
G'day, it's Carl Obst here from the IDEA Group in Melbourne. I've been asked to give you a short overview of the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, or the SEEA, because that's the focus of this workshop, and there's a few basic things about how it all comes together which would be useful to underpin the discussion over the next couple of hours. In order to try and give you that summary, and it's really not trying to be particularly technical, I've decided to use this little mixing bowl here, and I'm going to go through the 5 key ingredients that make up the SEEA to give you a sense of what we're trying to bring together. The first key ingredient is economics. Perhaps not surprising, but in actual fact, it's important to understand that the SEEA is trying to tell a story about the relationship between the economy and the environment. And one of the problems in the past has been that the story about that relationship has been lacking detail in terms of the effects that people have, the impacts that people and economic activity has on the environment, and our dependence, our use of the environment, underpinning both economic activity generally and our broader well-being. So we need that economic perspective to give us that richness of that starting point for the discussion. The second key ingredient is ecology. The reality is we have a wealth of scientific information about biodiversity, about soil, water, the air, all different types of ecosystems, both terrestrial and in the marine environment, not forgetting fresh water and wetlands. There's a whole range of things which we have a rich information source on, and we need to bring that into account and bring that into consideration when we're talking about this relationship between the environment and the economy. So they're our 2 key sources of information. But we also need a way in which we can tell the story about those 2 things together. And that's where the third ingredient, geography, comes into play. If we have that information about geography, we're able to place in context economic and environmental information. Indeed, everything happens somewhere. And it has been a real breakthrough in my own mind, as an economist by training, to see the power of telling a story through a spatially explicit approach to information. It's not quite there though, because we need a 4th ingredient, and that 4th ingredient is statistics, or more specifically, official statistics. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, perhaps, is a discipline called official statistics, which underpins our measurement of many measures that we take for granted, like the population of a country, unemployment numbers, GDP, consumer price indexes. All of these things are things for which official statisticians over many years have developed standard definitions, standard concepts, measurement approaches to become the way in which that information is collected and collated and informs government decision making, but also a lot of aspects in private and household decision making as well. So that discipline of official statistics is really a really fundamental part of taking forward a mature discussion about the relationship between the environment and the economy. It's not a situation where we want multiple data sets all competing against each other, telling similar but different stories. But we need something to bring it all together, to tell the story, and that's where the 5th ingredient of accounting comes into play. So the accounting is a story which it actually, in fact, enables a narrative to be told. It tells a story about stocks, how they are composed and how they change over time, stocks and flows. And that richness in an accounting narrative is often underappreciated. We take it for granted in the sense that we have these measures of economic activity, which some people understand are based on accounting principles, but really that richness of a consistent set of concepts, a consistent set of definitions, some clear measurement boundaries about how we go about telling a comparable and consistent story over time are really part of the richness of the accounting language, and enables us to describe systems in a somewhat abstract but comprehensive way. And that's really key to trying to tell this story about the relationship between the environment and the economy. So with all of these things mixed together in my very nice little mixing bowl here, what we've come up with in the SEEA is what we call the 4-box model, depicted here as circles, but having 4 components being the extent of different assets, the condition of different assets, ecosystem services, and benefits that we derive from ecosystems. Now, those 4 boxes together give us a complete framework for integrating all of this information, doing it in a spatially explicit manner, and telling a really rich story about what's that relationship that I mentioned numerous times now. The SEEA ecosystem accounting was initially developed in 2013. It's been worked on progressively over that time, and in another month we'll have a discussion at the United Nations Statistical Commission where a decision will be taken on the status of the technical advances that have been made, particularly over the last couple of years, involving numerous experts across all of these disciplines from around the world. There are a wide array of different projects on ecosystem accounting that have been undertaken over the past 10 years, including in Ireland, where there's quite a lot of work going on and a fantastic program of work in INCASE, which you'll hear much more about in the next hour or so. The final word from me is that the lesson from these ingredients that we're putting together and the lesson from developing the SEEA over the past 10 years in ecosystem accounting is that no single discipline, no single approach to data is the complete story. We need all of the pieces to be able to tell a complete and rich story about what's going on and how the things are changing over the time, and to give us a common basis, an agreed basis for how we might move forward into the future and make decisions and choices. Because ultimately, producing a set of accounts is not the end goal. The end goal is to change behaviour, to change choices that are to lead us down a more sustainable path. Thanks very much for the chance for talking to you, and best of luck for the rest of the workshop.
Great, thank you very much, Carl. As ever, a really nice, clear overview of the SEEA ecosystem accounts and this combination of disciplines into this clear accounting framework to help inform sustainable decision making. So thanks very much, Carl, and thanks for joining us. Carl will be available to answer questions in the Q&A session. Then our next speaker is Carl's colleague, Mark Eigenraam, and he's going to explain how they've used this SEEA approach to a marine park in southwestern Australia.
Good morning, everyone. The park area is in the lower southwest corner of Western Australia. It's approximately 200 to 300 kilometres south of Perth, and it's quite popular for tourism and other cultural activities. In the first part of the project, we spent quite a bit of time with the government and local stakeholders creating this conceptual diagram of the park. And the idea of this was to try and represent all the different elements. So we have ecosystems in here, we have cruise ships, we have research vessels, we have whale watching, seagrasses. There are many different elements, and was just to ensure that once we embarked on data collection and the creation of accounts and tables, that we considered these elements and we could create a narrative around these elements, and I'll return to that later in the presentation. The key foundation for conducting the work is we start with the core accounting model, which includes these 4 circles: ecosystem assets by size and type, their condition, the potential services, and then the monetary and non-monetary benefits. We undertook an accounting or data inventory, which would then align all the data that's possible with either asset type, condition, and services. The National Statistics Office was also involved, and they have a data quality statement. So we also had to put the data through that data quality statement and report back to the federal government. There was a lot of high quality data, but there were various issues when producing the accounting because there were gaps in the data, and the data wasn't necessarily designed to perform accounting. And the detail of those recommendations can be found in the final synthesis report, which is available on the web. A key output that was required from the project was a number of infographics. This one is the first one that's actually, you can see, is based on the core model. So we have the assets, conditions, services, and benefits. But the idea is try to communicate some of this complex information so that the stakeholders can understand what is happening. Within the condition element, you can see there's a little set of scales there at the bottom, and it's labeled ecologically sustainable use. And this is one of the premises of Parks Victoria, is how do they tell an ecologically sustainable use story. So trading off between the condition indices and activities whilst maintaining these services and benefits. This is the next infographic. We can see here in the top left, we still have the ecosystem assets. And so it was dominated by seagrass and sand areas, which was linked then to the park itself. What's of interest, though, is on the management zones, you can see that the seagrass is distributed across different institutions in the top right-hand corner. And down the bottom, then, we have a number of panels, and we've represented the services by sort of stacking the different services in different ways. And not all of these services were valued in monetary terms for this particular project. One of the key challenges of the project, and particularly for Parks Victoria, is communicating or creating a narrative around the multiple values that the marine resources provide. You can see here that we've coloured the boxes slightly differently, and there's a key within the larger document which describe the managers, the ecosystem assets, conditions and services. And we can see here that there's a relationship between the manager, Parks Australia, the fishing industry, the consumer at the end of the day, and also between the two ecosystems on the left-hand side, where seagrass meadows provide intermediate services to rocky reefs and vice versa. In summary, using the environmental economic accounting, it was possible to structure the information and contribute to Parks Australia's MERI program. It also improved the understanding of how ocean accounts can assist in sustainable management of the marine resources, and it was clear that the technical guidance on ocean accounting and the SEEA are very applicable to being able to account for marine resources. Thank you for your time and enjoy the workshop.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. And it's great to see the application of the SEEA, especially in the marine, you know, especially given the importance to that of the marine to us here in Ireland. And again, Mark highlighting the importance of data inventory, data quality, and we'll come back to some of these issues after the break when we talk about INCASE in particular. It was also really nice to see those great infographics for communicating the outputs with stakeholders. So thanks very much, Mark. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Lars Hein. So Professor Lars. Lars is Professor in Ecosystem Services and Environmental Change at Wageningen University, and he's on the advisory board of the UN SEEA Ecosystem Accounting, among others. And he's going to talk to us about how this approach has been applied in the Netherlands.
That's fine, Jane. Thanks a lot for the introduction. It's a pleasure to speak to you about the Netherlands experiences with ecosystem accounting. And I only have 5 minutes, so let's start with the first slide. So many of you in the room virtually, I think, are aware of the SEEA system and the main components of that system, but just very quickly, we have different individual accounts in the ecosystem accounting approach that deal with ecosystem extent, ecosystem condition, ecosystem services in physical and monetary terms, and also the asset account, which is like the bank account of represented equivalent of your ecosystems. And the idea, of course, is to produce, as also previous speakers have said, maps and accounting tables that connect to the system of national accounts. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please, Jane. Sorry. Yeah. So in the Netherlands, we've been working on ecosystem accounting since the last 9-10 years. Initially, we started with some funding from the European Commission, a research project in one province where we looked at a limited amount of services. And of course, over time, the SEEA ecosystem accounting framework developed as well. So we were able to continuously enhance our approach to remain in line with new developments in the SEEA framework. In the end, following the pilot phase funded by the European Union, we got funding from the Dutch government to continue the work and to expand the work. And we scaled up from 1 province, 1 out of 12 provinces in our country, to the whole country. We did spend quite a lot of resources on that, mostly in a collaboration between Wageningen University and the Dutch Statistical Office, CBS. And we were able to tap into a broad range of data sources and data sets from many different research institutes. And well, we're a relatively small country in the Netherlands, but we do have a lot of data on all the ecosystems that we have. We published our first full suite of ecosystem accounts in, I think 2 or 3 years ago, but very soon we will publish the second generation of Netherlands ecosystem accounts. We'll have developed them for 2013, 2015, and 2018. And then we'll have extent, condition, physical, and monetary services, and also assets updated. And our extent account has a resolution of just a few meters. It's really quite detailed. In terms of the thematic account, we've again adjusted to the revised SEEA ecosystem accounting framework. And we've done partial biodiversity account, I should say, because biodiversity accounting is proving to be the most difficult one. There's so many indicators that you can choose for biodiversity, so many data sources, and it's the most challenging one that we face even in our small country. Then we have a carbon account, and also a marine account is under development. So maybe next slide, Jane. We don't have an urban account, you may have noticed, and I thought that I would use this slide to illustrate why. This is one of the provinces, is the most densely populated province, South Holland, and you see the city of Rotterdam and The Hague. So it's very urbanized, so we don't have an urban account. We didn't see really the need, given that we are such a densely populated country. You also see on the right-hand side, you see the different ecosystem types that we distinguish in our extent account. So it's quite elaborate. It's something like 30 different units, reflecting, of course, the natural ecosystems, but also some urban ecosystems, some urban land use. Next slide. Well, I cannot really, in these 5 minutes, show much of the details of the account. So I just took this slide, which is the asset value of ecosystems in the Netherlands. I have to say it's still the previous one. The updated one will be available next month or so. And it's quite clear that if you look on the pie chart on the right-hand side, that the most valuable services are nature recreation and tourism. We differentiate between the two, with tourism involving overnight stays and recreation being day trips basically from your own house. Well, what's quite clear then is that the areas that provide a lot of recreational services, they are turning up in blue, and in that sense, no Dutch person will be surprised by the importance in that sense of the dunes and the coast and the forest area in the center of the country and the hilly landscape in the southeast of the country. Then we have the amenity service, for which we now have a new estimate, which would double actually the previous estimate. So that is also an important ecosystem service. Carbon sequestration, for example, is very small in our country, also not a surprise. But still, it is, and actually it's quite consistent with the UK. From what I understand, where also recreation and tourism were the most important services in monetary terms. Still, of course, it's quite remarkable that crop production and livestock are having such a relatively low value, because the Netherlands is actually an important agricultural producer. We kind of try to understand that based on the way ecosystem services are valued in ecosystem accounting, and perhaps also the fact that many Dutch farms are really technology intensive, capital intensive, and the contribution of natural capital to greenhouse horticultural production, for example, is very small, and even to our crop fields. Actually, it seems that if you use a valuation approach aligned with SEEA, the value of that agriculture, the ecosystem service is relatively small. To me, that was the most striking outcome of the valuation exercise. Given the time, we need to go to the next slide. This is just one example from butterflies, and I really quite like this example. This work has been done by CBS based on the voluntary counts of species by millions of volunteers in the Netherlands. So the database is really huge. It's got, I think, 100 million or 50 million entry points. And but the accounting approach has kind of enabled us to look at the data again in a bit more detail. And it's quite interesting because here this is butterflies. Sorry, I didn't. Some of it is translated, some is not. So it's butterflies on a 10 square kilometer grid. And the interesting thing is that, of course, we had a feeling, we had an understanding that butterfly populations were declining in our country, but this graph shows that it's actually the butterfly populations on the sandy soils that are declining, and not so much the butterflies on the clay or the peat soils, which we have in the west and the north of the country. So this kind of detail is actually, I think, very relevant for managing biodiversity in this case. I think that was my last slide, Jane, or is there one more? Ah, there's one more, I'm sorry. So, well, maybe I'm not sorry. Hopefully this is also of some interest. So a main challenge that we're facing is, okay, now we've developed the accounts, and that's great and that's nice, but how do we ensure that actually the information is used? And that's even not as straightforward as at least I was thinking initially, because I thought, look, we have very nice information on all kind of aspects relevant for environmental management that we didn't have before we started the accounting projects. And we talk to provinces, we talk to the national government, we talk to municipalities, and people are interested in the information. They say, yeah, this is what we need, but still it is proving really a challenge to kind of align and to communicate the accounts to the users. And part of the reason perhaps is that the accounts are very comprehensive. There's a lot of data in there. There's also, so it's not always easy for the user to find exactly the information that the person needs. Perhaps also people need some time to get used to the accounting approach of dealing with environmental information. Well, to facilitate that process a little bit, we developed a viewer, which is now supported again also by the MAIA project. I didn't mention it yet, but we have the MAIA project supporting ecosystem accounting in 10 European countries, not Ireland, unfortunately, but the Netherlands is included in that. There's a website there where you can find some more information on accounts, also some lectures that are on the website on accounting. In any case, we use that viewer as one of the ways where we can kind of facilitate access to the accounting information to the user with some initially, I think, promising results, although even there, you see that users actually do need a bit of support to get used to that viewer or that web tool. That was all. I hope I kind of stick within my time limit, Jane. Thank you very much again for being allowed to present here. And I look forward to the rest of the workshop. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lars. And again, it's really inspiring to see progress from a country that's just a few years ahead of us, and really interesting to see how important those cultural services are in monetary terms. It'd be really interesting to compare when we do scale up in Ireland, to compare with what you found in the Netherlands. And also, this issue with communication, and how to communicate this with users. So that's great. Thanks very much, Lars. If you have questions for Lars, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll move on now. So our last two presentations before we go to the Q&A are about how ecosystem accounting is progressing in Ireland. First of all, we have Tom Healy, who's the head of the CSO, the Central Statistics Office Ecosystem Accounts Division, and he'll tell us about their progress and plans for the year.
Hello, my name is Tom Healy. I'm head of the Ecosystem Accounts Division, which was set up last April by the CSO, and our remit is to develop ecosystem accounts across a range of ecosystem types. One of the advantages of locating ecosystem accounts in the CSO is that we're in a unique position to link data across a range of different spheres, social, economic, environmental. We're also in a position to contribute to a national conversation about classifications of ecosystem services, assets and types. For that end, we need to work very closely with ecologists, but also with other disciplines relevant to this area. And this is a point very strongly emphasized in the system of environmental accounts, specifically for ecosystem accounts, that it is going to involve cooperation across many different organizations and people. So what are our short-term objectives? We plan to publish a general introduction and overview of ecosystem accounting, along with our first module, which will be focused on peatlands. Peatlands as an ecosystem asset is a very important area, very topical. It covers a very large extent of land in Ireland. It's also very much in the news as regards the transition to ecologically friendly bogs, the introduction of re-wetting of the bogs, and the potential of peatlands to contribute to carbon capture at a significant level. Later, we plan to publish a release on agricultural ecosystems and in particular, the contribution of agriculture to the provision of biomass. Biodiversity is an extremely important topic, characteristic of ecosystems, and we, in the first instance, plan to publish a framework document to set the course for a set of biodiversity indicators in the medium term. Finally, during this year, we plan to publish an initial release on forest ecosystems, their contribution to provisioning and selected ecosystem services. So just to say a word about peatlands, this will be our first thematic module. And here we are working with data from a number of public organizations. It's interesting to note that the condition of peatlands has become a really topical matter of public interest, and we are in a position to report some data on the quality of peatlands in different areas of the country. Obviously, this is a work in progress, and peatlands are a fascinating part of the Irish landscape, accounting for well over 15% of total land cover, and also with significant implications in the long run for carbon capture to reverse some of the damage to the environment. Then later we will be publishing data on agricultural ecosystems, and in this table is some example of the extent of croplands and grasslands, which together account for over 60% of total land cover in Ireland at this time. The data here are based on what's called Coreen land cover map for 2018. We do look forward to the results of joint work between OSI and the Environmental Protection Agency with a new land cover that will give much greater precision and much greater possibility for mapping different types of ecosystems, and agriculture will be obviously part of that. I have the good fortune to live within 5 kilometers of green and blue space, and I've used access to natural amenities such as these every day since the beginning of lockdown. In ecosystem accounts, we are working with our colleagues in the Environment Division to measure the frequency and number of visits to various natural amenities and duration of visit. This is one part of a very important aspect of ecosystem services, namely the enjoyment and the use that households make of ecosystem assets.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. It's great to hear about the approach of the CSO, and the cultural services, again, the recreation services and the benefits of our green and blue spaces highlighted there. So that's great. Thank you very much. And our final speaker then, before we go to the Q&A, is Gretchen Daly. So Gretchen is the environmental officer at BIM, and she's talking about how they are applying SEEA approach of natural capital accounting, particularly in Clwyd in County Mayo.
Hello, my name is Gretchen Daly. I work as an environmental officer in the Seafood Technical Services business unit of BIM. BIM, or Ireland Seafood Development Agency. Today I'm going to talk to you about our project on the testing and demonstrating the application of natural capital accounting to the seafood sector, focusing in on Clwyd in County Mayo. First, I want to provide a small bit of background about the seafood sector, and more particularly the aquaculture sector in Ireland. The seafood sector in Ireland is small but important for the economy, society and the environment. It employs more than 16,000 people directly and indirectly, and these jobs are mainly located in coastal and peripheral regions. Much of our seafood is exported. Aquaculture production is dominated by salmon, oysters and mussels. Salmon is our highest value seafood export. This is due in part to organic certification, which in turn is reliant on a high quality environment. There are 278 aquaculture production units in the country, and 25% of all aquaculture production comes from the northwest region, which includes our study area, Clew Bay. Within Clew Bay, there is longline mussel production, oyster production, Clare Island Organic Sea Farm, as well as a range of fishing activities. Recognising that natural capital accounting was an emerging discipline and keen to explore its relevance to the seafood sector, BIM engaged initially with Natural Capital Ireland to find out a bit about the whole area. In 2019, IDEA Group were contracted to assist us to conduct an initial assessment to examine if and how natural capital accounting could be applied to the seafood sector. The assessment concluded that natural capital accounting can bring about a range of opportunities and help address various sectoral challenges as listed. Its application could be relevant at agency level or at sectoral level, from national through to business scale. Moving on from the initial assessment, BIM decided to examine the real-life application of natural capital accounting for the seafood sector. This project has recently started, and again, working with IDEA Group, we are using the SEEA approach and mirroring what is being done by INCASE, albeit at a much smaller scale. We chose Clew Bay, County Mayo as our study area for a number of reasons. BIM have two excellent regional development officers located in the area. They have built strong relations and engaged with the seafood and wider stakeholders through CLAMS, Coordinated Local Aquaculture Management Systems, RIF, the Regional Inshore Fisheries Forum, and other local initiatives. Clew Bay is data rich and an area where leisure and recreation and the seafood sector are very integrated. We are planning to test and demonstrate natural capital accounting over 2 case studies. The first case study looks at sustainable management of marine resources at bay scale and supporting marine spatial planning with natural capital accounting. The second case study looks at improving business level sustainability performance using natural capital accounting based sustainability assessments and reporting. This case study will focus on a shellfish aquaculture business or business cluster. This is because aquaculture is spatially defined. A lot of work is ongoing on shellfish management systems, and we are also keen to explore shellfish ecosystem services. To date on the project, we have established our internal and external steering committees and conducted training with the team. We are really happy with the team and they've already contributed valuable inputs. We are currently developing a use case questionnaire to help focus the case studies and ensure that we can tap into all of the relevant data and identify gaps and make sure that the applications are relevant to the sector. Over the coming months, we will be collecting and inputting data and seeing what we can learn, what stories can be told, and what challenges met within the case studies. The project will end in 2021, but we are excited to see what we can learn from it and how its wider application may be able to support the future management of the seafood sector and the natural environment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gretchen. It's great to hear about applications of SEEA both at the base scale by the sectoral agency and at the business scale. So thank you very much, Gretchen. And so that brings our presentations for the first session to an end. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So we have some questions in the Q&A. I realized that actually in our timetable we were supposed to stop for a break now, but what I'm proposing is we have a short Q&A and then have a break before we go into the INCASE session. I would like to invite the panelists if they'd like to share their videos. I have a question here for Kathy to begin with. So this question, Kathy, is that given the UK is 10 years ahead could you give us any insight into how the approach has actually made a difference in terms of securing the value of nature and stopping or turning around environmental degradation?
Yeah, I saw that question. I think it's a really good one. I think the way it's now happening is that our major conservancy bodies like the National Trust, but also our farming communities, have bought into and are already starting to map the baseline in the natural capitals on their land, because there's a payment system that flows through with it. So you're starting to see farmers particularly talking about which parts of their landscape they need to conserve because of the nature on there. So it's almost a bottom up, and this is where it's getting into policies, it's getting into the Environment Act, but it's taken 10 years to get there. I think everyone was very keen on the idea at the beginning, but it was always competing with other things on the landscape. But now people are starting to realize that if they farm or they manage the natural capital, and they will get payments for the societal benefit it provides, it becomes tangible. And so I would say that 10 years on, that's probably the biggest change that's occurring.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kathy. And maybe I could actually also invite Lars from the experience in the Netherlands. The same question, has this approach really made a difference in terms of securing value of nature and reversing environmental degradation?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. In my experience in the last few years in the Netherlands, it seems that the inputs that we provided with the accounts are of course always only a part of the information that's provided to decision makers, and they will consider environmental interest and maybe some economic implications of environmental management options that we can provide them with. But still, there's so many other factors that determine policies and decisions that it's hard to disentangle the specific contribution of the accounts. I would say the most concrete option is peatland, so that's interesting perhaps for Ireland also, because in the Netherlands we also have a lot of peat. 8% of our land area is covered with peat, so that is quite a lot. And specific for our country is that the peat is subsiding, right? And combined with being a low-lying country and sea level rise, it's a very dangerous thing for the future. But still, there's a lot of vested economic interest in managing these peatlands. And there we've been able to provide inputs into the debate. I've been invited to many discussion forums, talking to many policymakers, giving advice based on our accounts, and the main concrete policy where it is reflected now is the National Climate Strategy, where there is something like, sorry, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 250 million euros set aside for better managing peat. And really that number and the priorities in those policies were informed by the accounts that we produced. So in that sense, there is at least one clear example.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you very much, Lars. And I think it's really interesting. That's a really good question. And how do we actually use these things to help inform decision making? So thanks very much. There's a comment from IDA Group that Parks Victoria co-founded the work. Carl, I don't know if you want to explain anything there. It's not really a question, it's just a comment.
I think we'll skip that one.
Okay, fine, that's great, thank you. Okay, so there's a question for Tom Healy. So in order to access ecosystem services effectively in nature, do we need to collect data on a catchment-wide basis as opposed to municipal or county level data collection?
That's a very good question. I think one possible approach, suggested in the Netherlands presentation is that it may be possible to scale up from small areas, small catchment areas. So perhaps some of the work that is being done by INCASE could be enlarged to county level. I'm talking now about 5-10 years down the road. What we do need, I think, at national level is some type of coherent single survey of ecosystem services. And I think that needs to be done probably by a number of agencies in collaboration. And that again, I think, is a leaf from what has been done in the Netherlands. I guess, to be honest, we're following the example of some other countries, notably the UK, Netherlands and other countries as well, to be fair. It's going to take some time and some collaboration.
Hi, this is Orla. Just it looks like Jane's frozen there, so I might take the remaining questions. So thanks very much for that answer there, Tom. We just have one left from Katrina Douglas, I think, on how do we improve national compatibility scale methods of necessary data sets. Just given that's a national question, I might put that to you, Tom, and then we can take a quick break.
On mute. Yes, I think this is where it's really important that a range of disciplines engage with issues of comparability and interpretation. We're moving towards a final version of SEEA for ecosystem accounts, but I think the interpretation, unpacking of that at national level is going to be extremely challenging. And for example, one area is condition of ecosystem assets. For that purpose, I think the role of ecologists and the role of other disciplines will be really crucial. So I think there is certainly a lot of ground to be traveled there. Does that answer the question?
I think, yeah, just that, you know, there is a lot of ground to be traveled, but maybe we can take that offline. You know, all our kind of panelists, I think, are happy to take questions. And I know Kathy is responding to a question in the chat, but just given time, I think we'll just break for 5 minutes. So coming back at 11, well, just after 11:05 if you can. So just a quick break to stretch the legs. So we'll be back after that. And thanks very much to all our panelists for their brilliant presentations. All of these will be available online afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Apologies for my Wi-Fi dipped out there. I think we were just coming towards the end of the Q&A anyway, but I just want to thank all of our speakers this morning. It was great to have that international context of what's going on elsewhere and what's happening in Ireland, in the agencies and in in different organisations. So it's a brilliant first start to the workshop this morning. So thank you very much, everybody. In this second half, we're going to focus on the EPA INCASE project. And so, Catherine, can you forward to the next slide, please? What we're going to do, that wasn't what I expected, actually, sorry. That's okay. Well, I guess just by way of introduction to the INCASE project, first of all, is that it's this interdisciplinary project, and it's really, as Carl was talking about earlier, it's bringing together all the different disciplines, the ecologists, the economists, the socioeconomists, and the natural capital experts. So we're going to start this session by asking you to please reflect on the presentations that you've already heard. And this poll is, do you think that natural capital accounting could be useful in your work? And the response is yes, no, not sure, or something else. If it's something else, please pop it into the Q&A or the chat. As the second half of this morning, you know, we've already heard from our speakers about the application of natural capital accounting in other parts of the world, in the UK, in the Netherlands, and we've heard from Tom how this is beginning in Ireland. And what the INCASE project aims to do is to test natural capital accounting at catchment scale in Ireland. And as I say, it's an interdisciplinary project. We've ecologists, economists, socioeconomists, natural capital experts. And for the second half of the workshop this morning, we're going to hear from the team members, so people working full-time on the project. So start with Catherine, and then Daniel, and then Lisa. And then Mary, Stephen, and Carl will talk about how the work we're doing in INCASE links with some of their other work. And finally, Orla will finish out with some thoughts on the approach itself. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have time for some Q&A. So just for those of you who were at our workshop just over a year ago, it's been a very busy year since then. It seems very much longer than a year ago that we were all together in the Alexandra Hotel in Dublin, but just over a year ago. Since then, we finalised our feasibility report, which was approved by the EPA, published last June, and is available from both the INCASE and the EPA websites. Once we got the green light to continue the project, Catherine turned her focus to see what's been done in other countries, and we got Lisa on board in April and started building up the data sets that we need to follow the SEEA accounting framework that Carl and others described this morning. And we started to build up natural capital stocks, extent and condition component for ecosystems and geosystems. And thank you very much to all the specialists who gave their time to assist with this process. We published a paper on geosystems, particularly in the context of limestones, in the proceedings of the International Association of Hydrologists. Thanks to GSI and Donald Daly for helping with that. And just to mention our INCASE video explainer. So this is this animated short video which we launched last summer, which proved to be a very useful way to distill and convey the concepts of NCA. And it's actually been translated into several languages and had many thousands of views. So that's been very useful. By the autumn, we gathered most of the data available to build extent and condition accounts. We had a number of focus catchment workshops, all in the Dargle. We started with the Dargle catchment and used that as our test bed for extent and condition. And again, thanks to all the people who were involved in those workshops. Daniel joined the team in November, and we began to build the structure of the various services accounts. So that's what we've done over the last year. And as I say, I'm going to hand over to the project team who are going to give you a bit more detail, starting with Catherine.
Okay, hi everybody. I hope you can see me and I hope you can hear me, and I hope the connection stays good. So Mila Buikas Jane, good morning everybody. It's great to be with you all. I hope everybody's keeping well. So we're going back to the accounting framework, which has already been outlined well by Carl. So this is the SEEA ecosystem accounting model. It underpins all the work we're doing in INCASE and provides the framework really for the data gathering and aligning our accounting conversation. So while we note the SEEA is focused on ecosystems, we're extending that to include geosystems also, as well as atmospheric services. So my role this morning is to really just present a snapshot of what we've done in relation to extent and condition. So just a reminder that we're piloting the SEEA at catchment scale. So why is that? Well, one, you have to start somewhere. Two, the SEEA approach can be applied at a range of scales. And three, I guess we're exploring its usefulness alongside the integrated catchment management approach adopted by the EPA. So using nationally available data sets, we're exploring what's possible and then bringing in the catchment level data sets where available so we can further assess how to develop the full set of accounts. So there are 4 really interesting catchments. I'd love to talk about them each for ages, but we will be having specific workshops in each catchment over 2021. So just a reminder, we have the Dargle in South Dublin, North Wicklow, and the Fidgile in East Offaly, West Kildare. Then the Bride is our largest catchment down in East Cork and touching into West Waterford, and the Carra in West Kerry. So we look forward to meeting some of you over the summer or maybe into the autumn in each catchment. So again, back to why the INCASE project. So really, we're working to establish the process steps and the data needs to develop natural capital accounts in Ireland. And by doing so, to help streamline the process that Tom talked about and identify the challenges along the way. So we started with extent. So here's a slide showing a high-level extent account. It shows the percentage cover of the range of ecosystem types in each of the 4 catchments for 2018. So we're using Corrine land cover as a coarse indicator of ecosystems, which does go to a limited detail. Now, we had hoped to be applying the OSI land cover mapping project data for INCASE, but it's unlikely we're going to have access to that for the duration of the project. Nonetheless, we'll work with what we have for now. So accounting is all about showing changes over time. So in this slide, we show the percentage cover for 2 time series and high-level changes in land cover or ecosystem stocks between 2000 and 2018. So already we can pick out general trends, such as in the Dargle, we can see the conversion of grasslands to urban. And in the Fidgile, which is that what we call our Bordnamona catchment, we can see the conversion or colonization of the cutaway bogs with pioneer woodland. Now, we do obviously have an array of supporting tables and information for 2012 and 2006, as well as change accounts, which tell us what land cover changed to what over a given period. So using the data we have, extent accounting is reasonably straightforward. Now we move to condition. So condition is probably the area with the least available information. Now we do have Water Framework Directive condition data available to sub-catchment and sub-basin level. And we do have conservation status and trends for the 59 habitats listed on the EU Habitats Directive, and those are available at national level. So today I'm just showing you some time series data for ecological status of watercourses in the Fidgile. And this shows how condition changes can be tracked at a sub-basin level over time. So we can see that in the Fidgile, 2 areas in moderate condition in the first time period show an improvement. That is, they literally go from amber to green in the second reporting period, while in 2 other areas, they both remain in poor water quality or they stay in the red. So combining these data with the knowledge of the pressures in each catchment allows the EPA to develop a risk register. And this highlights what subbasins are at risk of achieving good ecological status in the future. And it also helps prioritize areas for action. So for sure in the Fidgile, we're going to see a lot of improvement as the great work on rehabilitation is realized. So that's just showing the risk register for the fish oil, and you can see a number of areas in red there, which means that they're at risk. So to sum up, and I could talk about this for days, so I'm really limited in time, but to sum up, for our natural capital stocks, we need data on extent, the type of ecosystem, and the condition. The data must be reliable and available for time series. We're using land cover for extent. Is it good enough? In the absence of a national ecosystem map, it's probably as good as it gets for now. In terms of condition data, and this in my view is the missing link for sustainable use and the area where we need to focus our brain power, as what gets measured gets managed. And in the same way that health is wealth for each of us, the health of our ecosystems is also our less appreciated health and possibly only noticed when it's gone. So now I'm going to hand over to you, Danny. So please, I'll stop my video and mute myself.
Thanks, Catherine. So my name is Daniel Norton, and I'm going to be discussing ecosystem services and benefits as part of the SEEA framework. So Catherine talked about the asset extent and condition, and I probably heard a lot about ecosystem services. So what are they? There's a number of different definitions, but the main one that we're using is that they're nature's contributions to human well-being, and they can be divided into a number of different typologies. So we have provisioning services. They're tangible things that you can pick up and hold. So you can think of food, timber, drinking water. They can be transported in and out of catchments, so that can cause an issue as well. Then the next ones are regulating and maintenance services, like carbon sequestration, flood regulation. They happen in the background. Most people don't think about them very often, and you don't realize there's anything they're happening until something goes wrong with them, and then you realize very quickly and immediately. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about the cultural services. So this is where people are directly interacting with our natural environment. So things like recreation, aesthetics, our health and well-being. And we've seen that during the pandemic that a lot of people are getting some relief, I suppose, from getting out from walks within our 5K or previously 2K. So this leads us to three questions. Where are the people? Because without the people meeting the ecosystems, there's no ecosystem services. If you can have one or the other, but it's only when you bring both together that you actually have an ecosystem generated and then a benefit generated from nature. What are they doing? Are they farming, or are they recreating, or are the ecosystems that they're managing, what are they producing for people? And then if we degrade our natural capital, who could lose out? So next one there, Catherine. So one of the things we can just quickly look at where people are, and that can tell us a lot very quickly in terms of what are both the pressures, but what are the suite of ecosystem services. So we can see in the upper right there, the Dargle, which we've talked about already, is that we've a highly populated catchment, especially in the eastern part of the catchment near Dublin and Bray. But that's going to be changing the ecosystem services as people move into the uplands to recreate. And the balance of ecosystem services will be more like the Dutch case, where you have a lot of cultural ecosystem services compared to other types of land use. And then if we look at the fidge oil, which Catherine talked about, you can see a lot of the former peatlands there are lowly populated density, and relatively we have low population density, and the same for the Cara. So maybe the ecosystem services there are more about the regulating services and less about the cultural ecosystem services when we come to the total valuation of these sites. And then when we look at the bride, we can see a mixture of both, some areas low population, some areas high population, but then this is a highly productive from a food point of view of ecosystem services. So talking about trade-offs between different ecosystem services, we can look at changes over time, as Catherine says. If we go to the next slide, we can see that over time, we have massive population increase in the Dargle, especially relative to the other catchments. So you're nearly a 300% increase in population from 1950 to 2016. But also we have some changes in the catchments where we do scale them up. So if we look in the pink there, the bride and the fidge oil in purple, we can see that population was relatively stable until the 2000s. So the Celtic tiger took off. Bride is in the catchment of Cork City, and the fidge oil is starting to come into the catchment of Dublin. So we've seen an increase in population there. So these new people coming into the catchment, what services are they going to need or use, or how does that change in the land use as well? And this compares to the Cara down in Kerry, where we actually have seen a population decrease. in that area. So that will change the demand on that. So just looking in a bit more detail at the Dargle, we can see here there's been a massive population increase in the Dargle. So that'll mean that there's an increased demand for cultural ecosystem services like recreation or health and well-being within the catchment. But we compare what is the trade-off in the land use that we're having. So if we move in the next slide, we can see one of the trade-offs is the decrease in the amount of food production, food provision and ecosystem service in the catchment. So if we look at the all, we can see that on the blue line, that's our overall livestock unit. So about 80 to 85% of the catchment is used for grazing. So it's mostly livestock production. And we can see over time that has decreased. And then we can see the difference between the rural EDs and the urban EDs. We can see that up until the 1980s, within urban areas in Dublin and Bray, we did have some agricultural, but once it came up to the 1990s, there might have been a small amount, but it dips below the CSO reporting level. And also in mapping up this, or in showing changes over time, we can see how different things respond to EU policy. So especially the sheep numbers, which are predominantly in the uplands, that we see the big increase initially after joining the EU, and it's only recently with decoupling we've seen a decrease actually to below pre-1970 levels. So by mapping changes, we can tell a lot about the story within our catchments in terms of different ecosystem services. So thanks very much, and thanks to the CSO for helping provide information, especially Tom Healy and Sophie Emerson.
So, hi everyone, I'm the GIS analyst working on the INCASE project, and today I'm going to talk about gathering data for the project, which affects all aspects of the SEEA accounting model. Next slide, please. So for the project, we've been in contact with or used data from a variety of agencies, some of which I've listed here to give you an idea of the diversity of data required for the project. And this list is continually being added to and will be over the next year as work continues on the project. I just want to thank all agencies we've been in contact with and who have provided us with data. We really appreciate the time and effort people have put into helping us. And next, please, Catherine. But as you can probably imagine, when using data from so many agencies, there's many challenges that come along with combining or looking at the data sets holistically. So firstly, actually gathering and finding the data has been a challenge. And because we're using so many data sets, it means contacting all the data providers to get them. And it highlights the need for all data required for the natural capital accounting approach to be available in one location. Data.gov.ie has a lot of information, but the majority of the data sets we used involve going directly to the data providers themselves, even if the data was open source. The next challenge is the coverage of spatial data. So some of the data sets are available only for part of a catchment or only one of the 4 catchments, while others are available nationally. So for the INCASE project, that can make it difficult to compare some aspects or ecosystems between the catchments because we've better data for some than for others. And next, with so many agencies, there are several different coordinate systems used, different resolutions and different minimum mapping units. And this often means that more work than necessary is required to match up or compare data sets. Next is that there are often different time series used for each agency's data collection. So some data sets we've used have been collected every year, others have been every 3 years, and then others have been every 5 years. So this means that working on natural capital accounting for a specific year can be quite challenging. Next are data gaps. We found that the majority of data gaps so far in the project were in terms of condition, where very little data is collected. And often when data is available for condition, it's only released aggregated to a national level. As well as this, there's no ecosystem map of Ireland, and the OSI land cover map is yet to be released. However, this map will fill in some of the gaps we've encountered. Next is actually working at catchment level itself. This has proven to be difficult. And this is because very few agencies report or collect data at a catchment level. So getting data sets to match up is difficult because anything reported at electoral division or county level only, for example, it doesn't match up at the catchment boundaries and can't be segregated. However, I just want to say that while there are challenges with the data, this doesn't mean that natural capital accounting can't be done. And the INCASE project has proven that with the work we've done so far, while also highlighting how research and data collection in certain areas could improve the process. So next, please, Catherine. So I have an example here to show how gathering as many relevant data sets as possible benefits natural capital accounting. So on the left is a map of Corrine 2018 forestry and woodland in the Dargle, and it's split into 4 categories. So broadleaf, which is orange, coniferous, which is purple, mixed forestry, which is pink, and then transitional woodland shrub, which is green. And what Corrine tells us is that about 18% of the catchment is covered in trees. But when comparing Corrine alone for extent to when we add in the other data sets gathered like the Native Woodland Scheme or Quiltshire plots and Article 17 data, the map on the right better represents the picture we get of tree cover in the catchment. So instead of 18%, these data sets combined tell us that 40% of the catchment is covered in trees. And as we work through the other catchments, this is a trend that persists where the tree cover is approximately doubled with the extra layers added in, showing the importance of collecting as many appropriate data sets as possible. I also just want to mention that we're hoping to run a Data for Nature workshop this summer, but we'll circulate an invitation for this so all attendees stay close to the time and when we have more information. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll hand over to Jane now to run a poll, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine, Lisa, and Danny. It's great to have such good summaries of where we are and an overview of the progress and the challenges, and this explicit linking of the ecology and the economics. So thank you very much. We have a question now for the audience. So this is in terms of responsibility for natural capital accounting, and which organisation do you think should be responsible for creating natural capital accounts here in Ireland? Okay, so I can't see whether the answers are coming in, but I'm assuming they are. So thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to the poll. We're running a little behind time, so I'm going to move on now to the next of the presentations. Our last 4 presentations are from other members of the project teams. So first of all, from UCD, we have Mary Kelly-Quinn. Mary.
Thanks very much, Jane, and good morning, everybody. I have a particular interest in the ecosystem services component of the natural capital accounting, and especially ecosystem services that relate to freshwater. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts with you on this in this area in my 5 minutes. So certainly ecosystem services and the flow of services are key components of the accounting framework in that they link the condition of the environmental assets directly to the benefits to people. And in my opinion, natural capital accounting provides an umbrella framework that captures the so-called ecosystem services approach. And that has been described as a way of understanding the complex relationships between nature and humans to support decision-making with the aim of reversing the declining status of ecosystems and ensuring the sustainable use, management, and conservation of resources. So in this way, it supports efforts to achieve, for example, the objectives of the Water Framework Directive and aligns with integrated catchment management. And this is becoming increasingly important in Ireland as we are challenged to reverse the, for example, the decline in water quality. Jane, can I have the next slide, please? So the recent EPA indicators report on water quality in 2019 highlighted that 43% of river water bodies and 46% of lakes are in moderate or worse biological quality. Now, there have been some improvements, but not to the extent that is required. The report also highlighted really drastic losses in the highest quality, so-called Q5 sites since the 1980s, dropping from several hundred in the 1980s to just 22 today. And some river sites are also showing an increasing trend in nitrate and phosphorus. By looking at ecosystem services, we're taking a step beyond this water quality reporting to consider the consequences for the services and the benefits that we depend on. So we're literally taking a step out of water. And there are a number of proposed advantages to taking this step, which I'll show you on the next slide, Jane, please. So first of all, it makes explicit the widest range of services and benefits, and Danny listed the different categories of services: provisioning, regulating and maintenance, and cultural. So those benefits provided to humans by aquatic resources, and as I said, the effect of condition on those services and benefits. Importantly, it helps communicate to the public the importance and value of protecting the health of ecosystems and their biodiversity, improves the basis for cost-benefit analysis to justify expenditure on, for example, water resources protection measures, and as Danny mentioned, identifies synergies to services and trade-offs that can inform more beneficial win-win solutions. But it comes with some challenges that we need to address, and they're listed on the next slide, Jen. So the first is to identify the widest range of services, and in particular recognize those that are important to people. So, for example, the workshops with the general public that were run in the ES Managed project that I coordinated showed that the river services ranked most highly by participants were actually cultural services, and I've listed some of those there on the slide. So a second challenge relating to that is to select the appropriate attributes that best represent the benefits or what is valued, and of course for which data are available. In fact, the lack of data on ecosystem services, and particularly cultural services, limited the number of services that the ES Managed project could actually deal with. So this is probably the second to the link that key link that Catherine mentioned. So we need to identify and initiate collection of data on key ecosystem services. Finally, we need tools then that can support decision making to explore consequences of management for ecosystem services, or the measures needed to maximize certain services, or indeed bundles of those services. And that's part of the task that's been undertaken by a project that I'm involved in, the ES Decide project. And I think the experience from that project will also feed back into the INCASE project. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's really useful. And again, highlighting the importance of cultural services. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Carlo Donahue. Carlo, are you there?
Hi, folks. Good morning. Very nice to be here. I don't see anybody, but hi to everybody out there. I must say it's very interesting working on such an interdisciplinary project with so many different perspectives, and it's a credit to the team in bringing it all this stuff together to have something useful. And what I do is I do economic modeling, and I guess over the last 10, 15 years have been developing various economic models that have been used in impact assessment of public policy. But from an economic point of view. So we did the economic and employment impact assessment for Food Harvest 2020 for the department, for the Harvesting Our Ocean Wealth strategy for the Food Rise 2025. And we're in discussions with Tom Arnold now about feeding back some similar inputs to the Agri-Food 2030 strategy, which is being deliberated upon now. And there will be likely be a dialogue on the results of that strategy and the plans for that strategy between March and May is my understanding. So what I bring to this project is trying to take things like that, a new strategy with aims for the sector, and instead of, as we did before, look at the economic or employment impact, to start to look at the natural capital footprint. So next slide, please. Thank you. So we're we've been in the developmental stage, I guess, in terms of the framework. And what we have is we have a model in the middle here, which essentially tracks individual value chains: dairy processing, cattle processing, crops, forestry and energy, seafood, and the flows between them. Cattle feeds into dairy, as well as the other sectors. And so what we do, and what we will do in this case, is to take the plans of the strategy. So it might set a target changes, whether it be in the past, there were certainly very ambitious growth strategies which were delivered. And that might have an impact on some agricultural sectors, which result in more output, more processing. And the model looks at the impact in terms of the consumer, employment, carbon emissions, and nutrition. Now, how do we link it to this project, where we're interested in natural capital in particular locations? We start at the catchment scale. We have another tool which can help us to downscale. It's called SMILE. It's a spatial model of the Irish local economy, which can help take, if there's change in animal numbers, hectares, land use, to look at the types of areas that might be affected by these changes, and to overlay that against the GIS layers that the project produced. So to cross-classify the plans for the sector, its impact at the local level, and the types and the characteristics of the natural capital that happens at local level. Where we are at the moment is we've built the infrastructure, and we run scenarios down to local level, and we're now working with other colleagues to get that data, to classify the changes. And we're working with Tom Arnold and the department to look at what that strategy will look like. And our plan is to feed back to the department an impact assessment of their strategy. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Carl, and it's great to see how we can feed directly into policy and national level strategies. Thank you very much. Our next speaker then is Stephen Kinsler, and Stephen is a professor of economics down in Limerick. Stephen, are you there? Can you?
I am indeed. Jane, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for a fascinating morning. It's been really interesting listening to the talks. I'm always struck by how much I learn from these events. So thank you very much, Jane, to the team for organizing this. It's very cool. Can we skip forward? I won't spend too much time on this. We spent a lot of time talking about what is natural capital accounting. So my interest in this, a lot like Carl, the last speaker, I'm an economist. I'm very interested in what's called stock flow consistent macroeconomic modeling. And here, when I was approached to talk about this project, I was very interested because valuations of stocks and flows are really what national economic accounting is all about. So the basic idea is how to value the assets that we have, both in terms of their, and this is just the system of national accounts that's been developed since the early and mid 20th century. How do we value what we have in money terms, and how do we watch it change over time? And so what we want to do is, as Carl, one of the previous speakers said, is develop a set of connections that connects the economic accounting, how much people consume, how much people invest, and so forth, to the environmental accounting, and particularly to an understanding of biodiversity. So can we have the next slide, please? That one there, yeah. So I think this is a very, very nice way of thinking about this. We've got physical flows in relation to what economists call, or national accounting technicians call, the production boundary. Where does the economy stop and the environment begin? Typically, the idea is that it happens in products and services, and we very often think about natural inputs like trees, and the economy turns the trees into timber, and then there's a resource residual that goes back. It's reinvested in a kind of a seed corn way, and it moves then again. And it's this boundary problem that really is the crux of a lot of the valuation issues that we're seeing throughout the project. The other major thing that we're seeing is a way to understand depletion and depreciation of the natural assets that we have. Mary Kelly Quinn's brilliant presentation showing water quality is a perfect example of that. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so maybe you guys all know this. It's an interdisciplinary project. We're bringing data sets together in a really interesting way, and we're very lucky that we have brilliant colleagues that are going to help us do that. Next slide, please. So this is actually from the SEEA's 2012 methodology report, which is a fascinating document if you're a wonk about this like I am, and it's about how ecosystem assets interact with each other. I think this is really, really interesting because we often think about the system of national accounts as that little bubble just underneath the ecosystem asset account. So it's economic and human activity. You're consuming, you're producing, you have intermediate consumption, you've got final consumption, and you have gross domestic product and so forth. But actually, this shows that there are linkages between ecosystems. And we have to find a way to understand those linkages as well, which constructs another fascinating boundary problem that we need to solve. Next slide, please. Just back one. There. So this is the basic sequence of the account. So this is actually how, in sort of numbers, once you get to the numbers, this is how the system of economic accounts connects to what we would understand as economists in terms of gross domestic product, gross national income, and so on and so forth. You've got output, intermediate consumption, consumption of fixed capital, and depreciation typically, but we're talking about depletion. Then you have things like gross value added, gross domestic product. You have depletion adjusted net value added, which is really interesting. If you think about it, you could cut down all the trees in Ireland tomorrow, GDP would rise. That's fantastic for GDP in 1 year. But of course, this shows that's a bad thing because we've just depleted our national asset count. And we can see here really deeply that we can get into the capital account, the financial account, and what I think is probably the most interesting area, the distribution of incomes and expenditures and uses and resources. Who's getting what? GDP might go up, but a whole community might have their local amenity destroyed. And Cahill's work on microsimulation really is kind of world leading in getting us to understand how that matters. Maybe the next slide, please. So why is this relevant for biodiversity? Really, I think it's important because a lot like Jane's poll, it helps us track expenditures and it helps us track income. So we see what's going where, when. I think we'll be able to see the major drivers of biodiversity loss. We all have a rough idea of what they are, but we'll know with this data a lot more granular and a lot more time-based data about what's happening where. And I'm a big believer, actually, that the financial market helps us offset loss and manage risk, despite the whole GameStop controversy. I think it, by and large, does a pretty good job there. And so, producing a set of measures that helps build financial products that can help us measure and offset biodiversity loss, green bonds, and so forth, will be very, very powerful. I think I might stop there in view of time, and just thank you very much for your time and attention. And hand back to you now, Jane.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen. And it's always great, you know, as an ecologist coming to this meeting of minds between the ecologist and the economist. So thank you very much for that. We will skip forward now to our last presentation. Orla is going to cover the last couple of slides here. Orla, are you there?
I am. Yep. Thanks very much. You can hear me okay. So yeah, I just want to close out with some kind of high level messages. My name is Orla Largy. I'm the executive coordinator with Natural Capital Ireland, and Natural Capital Ireland provides kind of communications and dissemination to the INCASE project. So I just want to reflect really on two messages that have stuck with me as we've provided those services to the project and tried to take all this technical information and produce, hopefully accessible videos and social media content and blogs and everything. So the first is to do with kind of where and how we spend our accounting time and efforts. And the picture there is a recent economic letter from the former governor of the central bank. And in it, he discusses some of the ins and outs of GDP calculations and how, depending on how you calculate it, you can make Ireland out to seem more prosperous than it is. And I won't get into his arguments here, but I read this over the weekend, which gives you a sense of how exciting my life is at the moment. But one of the takeaways for me is definitions matter, accounting frameworks matter. There's a global efforts going on how we calculate GDP, what's included, what's excluded, and how that makes a country look. And Stephen gave some great examples there. And it's just this idea that there's hundreds of thousands of people employed to gather these statistics on our economy and on other things. And there's international standards, there's business standards on how you produce your annual report, and that annual report is mandatory. And I just think we need to get there with natural capital accounting. It won't happen overnight, but you demonstrate what you value by where you spend your time and effort. And if we think man-made economies are complex, then nature has well, we haven't even scratched the surface of how complex nature is. So I'd encourage you to read that central bank report. It's only maybe 10 pages, but yeah, it just gives a sense of it can be applied then back to natural capital accounting, and it gives a sense of that complexity. And I say this not to scare anybody with how complex natural capital accounting is. All the presentations today have shown us just how many angles there are to it, but it's not about, oh, it's so complex, how could we start down this path? It's just, we already put this amount of time and effort into our kind of economic and financial accounting frameworks. Let's accord that same time and effort to nature. So next slide, please, there, Jane. Great. So the second message that I'm coming away with is that these accounts are actually like stories. Now, this is a painting from 1809 that Catherine found of one of the catchments, the Dargle catchment. And, we don't always think of accounts in that way. In fact, we very, very rarely think of accounts in that way as a story. But, a business's annual report can provide little insights into feuds, mistakes, decisions, characters, egos. And in the same way with natural capital accounting, you can trace the on-the-ground impact of different local and national policies, which areas have shrunk, which areas have grown, in which areas has condition degraded. We're not going back as far as 1809, but we are telling a story of change over time. And that's just the power of gathering this data and putting it side by side. I think Catherine has 2012 versus 2018, and you can see those little changes, and that's critical. And then just next slide, please, Jane, my last one there. I just wanted to announce the Data for Nature conference, which we're currently planning probably in May, but the date is to be decided. So we're running this from Natural Capital Ireland. It's not a part of the INCASE project, but we're using the insights from the INCASE project in that we have this open data portal, and we actually have an open data strategy for Ireland. But the project has made great use of that. But then again, they also had to go to all these agencies and specifically request data. And this conference will take a step back from INCASE and go a bit broader on how do we, operationalize all these, incredible data sets that we have to facilitate natural capital accounting, but also to facilitate climate and biodiversity and general environmental research. So look out for that. We're developing the program, so do get in touch if you have ideas. If you know of a speaker that absolutely has to be on that agenda, let me know. And yeah, I think we're going to move to, well, we have one final poll, but we're going to move to Q&A then after that. Thank you.
Great, so, thank you very much, Orla. And so, yes, our final poll is, did you achieve your goal for attending today? So So there it is. And I think one thing that's clear is there's an awful lot more to talk about than we could possibly cover in 2 hours. And thank you everyone who's been putting comments and suggestions and questions in the chat. If you have questions you'd like any of the INCASE team to answer, then please put it in the Q&A. We've about 10 minutes to finish, so maybe if we have a couple of questions before I sum up. But thank you very much to all the project team for their presentations. I think it's clear that there's an awful lot going on, and this meeting of minds across disciplines is just, we're just at the beginning of the process. So hopefully you're answering the poll there. There's no more questions coming into the Q&A. There's a comment in the questions that it's great to hear so many inputs from experts who are joining up their knowledge. And I think, yeah, it's mind-blowing, and it's also one of the most challenging but one of the most rewarding parts of this kind of process is this interdisciplinarity and trying to understand each other's language. You're trying to understand what ecologists mean when they talk about ecological condition versus what accountants mean and economists mean in their language. So absolutely. Katrina has a comment there. So who should do NCA? It needs cross-sectoral collaborative approach, but it also needs legislation and potentially a single coordinating body to drive it. I think I agree, but maybe I'll open that up to any of the project team who'd like to make a comment on that. Does anybody want to comment? I think it's something we need to work on anyway. I think this is an issue that that does need debate and discussion at a high level. It definitely needs to be cross-sectoral. I don't think there's one group or agency that can do this.
I might just comment.
Catherine, yeah, thank you.
Just to, I think all of the lessons that we heard from the different groups in the first part of the session showed that, you know, it's very much interdisciplinary and interagency. And so we had, you know, Lars working in a university, but also working with the National Statistics Office and with, you know, the land agencies. The same in the UK, a natural capital committee comprising a range of representatives across different agencies, economics, ecologists. So like my sense is if we're to organize this properly and in a structured way, that we'd start focusing on how do we do this? How do we build a structure? I saw one comment there that, you know, it needs a supporting legislation, because obviously unless you have to do something, you're not going to do it. So like that's probably the first thing. And, you know, I guess that's probably why the CSO has set up this ecosystem accounts unit, because they see this is going to become mandatory further down the line. But I think all talking together and building a structure fit for purpose to respond to what we're legally required to do and how that can sort of work across sectors. You know, in the State of the Environment report published before Christmas, the EPA really highlighted that we need to start integrating more our approaches to the environment, our work, our policy and all that. And that filters up through to the economy, which Stephen and Colin have both alluded to, and Danny. So I think, you know, this is the start of a conversation to how we structure it and develop.
Great. Great, thank you very much, Catherine. And you know, Catherine and myself and others have been trying to push this conversation since the formation of Natural Capital Ireland, and it's great to see the progress and the interest developing. So just sorry, Carl, did you want to come in?
I just want to come in at that, just in terms of the discussion of who should coordinate the accounts. I mean, it seems to me that the CSO is a logical coordinator. Clearly, it needs input from lots of different agencies, but I think it probably does need somebody to coordinate. I think they have a very good track record in terms of their independence. I mean, they're producing data for all sorts of areas that we rely on, and for us to rely on it, we need to trust it and to trust the quality. They have the infrastructure as well for collecting, coordinating and linking. And then the fact that they already create the national accounts And if one of the motivations for creating natural capital accounts is to amend the way we view ourselves and the wealth we have, or the services and goods and services that are provided by the economy, clearly that's the aim, is to influence them, and given that they collect them, they will know how to integrate them and promote them. So that's my
great. Thanks, Carl. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for the comments and the questions. Just before we finish, I don't have another poll there. Just before we finish, there's some final thoughts and reflections from me, just from the process over the last year or so, and from this morning. One key issue is obviously data. As Catherine said, and Lisa highlighted, we're using Careen, but this is just a start, and we're really looking forward to having better data, integrated data, and this Data for Nature conference that both Lisa and Orla have mentioned this morning is going to be really useful and important. The importance of cultural services, of recreation, of access to blue and green space, I think that's been mentioned lots of times this morning, and I think that's something that's really been unrecognised until now, and this process can really help to shine a light upon that. We've mentioned the importance of interdisciplinarity. It's hard to work across disciplines, but it's really important. Nature is as important as the economy. Some might argue more important than the economy. So we need to put the effort in. We need this integration and need to work across groups and agencies. And the SEEA ecosystem accounting approach is very logical, very systematic, and very holistic. Links everything in one framework, and the approach what we're finding in the project is the approach is very doable, and it's a useful way forward to inform and provide data for more informed decision making. And there's potential for use across sectors for projects or at a regional or national scale. I think the other thing is this process provides us with more than just accounts. It provides us with this story of change over time, and I think that's really important. And I think the final sort of key message is that we really need, if we look at that SEEA accounting framework of our stocks and our flows, is that we really need to see the stocks and the flows in the green. If the stocks, if the extent and the condition of our assets go into the red, if the extent and condition are declining and degraded, then the services and the benefits, the flows, also diminish. And I think that's really important. So hopefully you found today's workshop useful. I'd like to offer sincere thanks to all our presenters. I know it's been quite a rush through lots of presentations. Really appreciate all of the insights and the understanding, and look forward to continuing discussions. We're still at the beginning of this process. We're still forming those relationships and continuing discussions. So thank you to the presenters for this whistle-stop worldwide tour. If you want to follow the work of the INCASE project, please have a look at our website, where you can sign up to our newsletter, follow us on Twitter. If you want any more information, if you want to contribute, discuss, please do contact one of the project team. And we've collected all the questions and the comments and the chat that's come in this morning, and that's all really, really useful. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to continuing to engage across the community as we develop this exciting approach. So, and finally, sorry, I knew I would almost forget, finally, thank you, Orla and Fee from Natural Capital Ireland, for organising this really excellent event this morning and making sure it all runs smoothly. Thank you all very much. Good morning.